Hello everybody, this is Dan Trotter, Pretty Good Bible Studies. The video that I'm doing now is called Consensual Church Government Part 1. It is a part of a larger series of videos which you can see in my House Church playlist if you want to look that up on YouTube. And you can see videos on every aspect of the New Testament church, ecclesiology, till it comes out of your ears. This particular video is about how the New Testament church was governed, and we'll shockingly see, I think, that it was governed by consensus, not by democracy, not by autocracy, but by consensus of 100% of the brethren. I hope you enjoy it. All right, consensual church government. Let's get started. I'm going to divide the PowerPoint presentation up into three parts. We're going to look, first of all, at arguments in favor of consensual government. This is not an intuitive thing. Most people are shocked when they hear this. I remember the first time I heard it, I was at a house church conference, and the brother that was presenting the session on consensual government, I was convinced was a lunatic. It turns out he was right as I studied the issue further. Then we're going to look at, not in this video, but in future videos, the second video in this series, we'll look at authority in the church, different places where you can put authority, democracy, oligarchy, democracy, autocracy, that kind of thing. And churches have gone for different types of church government, and we'll see the problems with that and why the consensual model is the best. And last of all, I'm going to look at practical issues when it comes to having a consensual form of church government. But that's for future videos. This video, I'm just going to look at arguments in favor of consensual church government. Now, I'm going to divide this section of my PowerPoints into three subsections. First, I'm going to take some time to define ekklesia, the church. That's the word that's translated church in the New Testament. And I'm going to show you that the definition itself of ekklesia, the Greek word, just lends itself to the idea of consensual decision making. I'll explain that later. Then I'm going to give you 6 scriptural examples of consensus, and then I'm going to give you some scholarly quotations that back up my argument here. So let's start now with first the definition of ekklesia and how does it show consensus. All right, here's a definition of the word ekklesia in secular Greek literature outside the New Testament. Thayer's lexicon says that ekklesia is this: an assembly of the people convened at the public place of council for the purpose of deliberating. Now, I'm going to focus on deliberating here because that's the idea. The Greek word that's used for church in the New Testament has the connotation of a place of deliberation where decisions are made. Debate is taking place. Now, we think of the church as a place where you go get to hear a worship service if you're charismatic, or to go get a good teaching if you're reformed, or to witness to people if you're seeker sensitive. But the New Testament sees the church as a place of deliberation. And when you get involved in house church, everybody is deliberating things all the time, even if it's just where we're going to meet next week. But anyway, that kind of thing goes on all the time. And the idea is that people get together and come to a decision. Well, that's what the Greek word means, actually. Now, here's the Bauer, Arndt, Danker, and Gingrich lexicon. I've got that backwards, I think. I think that's supposed to be BADG. Lexicon says that, of course, the famous Greek lexicon, very authoritative Greek lexicon that everybody uses, says that ekklesia is an assembly of a regularly summoned political body. The assembly of a regularly summoned political body. So it's a political term, ekklesia is. Then we look at Colin Brown's New International Dictionary of New Testament Theology. And he says this: ekklesia is clearly characterized as a political phenomenon, repeated according to certain rules and within a certain framework. It was an assembly of full citizens, functionally rooted in the constitution of the democracy, an assembly in which fundamental political and judicial decisions were taken. The word ekklesia throughout the Greek and Hellenistic areas always retained its reference to the assembly of the polis. In the ekklesia, every citizen has the right to speak and to propose matters for discussion. That is a perfect description of what the church is supposed to be like. Even though the term is being used here in a political context outside the New Testament, it is still the idea of what a church is like. Now, let's look at the usage of the term within the New Testament. This is partial usage within the New Testament. The word is used one time of silver craftsman's guild. That was at Ephesus when they had the big riot there with the silver guildsmen upset with the Christians eating up their idol business. And the word is used of an assembly of craftsmen getting together to make their labor union decisions, if you will. It's used as a political forum in the same chapter there, the forum of the Ephesians. So there, again, the idea is of a political gathering place. Sometimes it's used for Israelis or Israelites gathered together for religious purposes. It's used, of course, of church meetings, and sometimes it's used of the universal church. And of course, the usage that we're interested in is for church meetings. The idea you can see here, a political forum, a guild where decisions are made. The idea is that it's a place of decision making, and the decision making, as we will see, is consensual. It's never ever used, by the way, the word ekklesia is never ever used for a church building. Now, what are some takeaways from all this? First of all, an ekklesia deliberates, discusses, and decides. A group of people gathered together in ekklesia deliberates, discusses, and decides. A church is an ekklesia. A church deliberates, discusses, and decides. Churches deliberate, discuss, and decide in the process of reaching a consensus. Jesus described the future church as an ekklesia. When I say future, I mean future to him. As an ekklesia in the famous church discipline passages in Matthew 16 and 18. He used a political word there in Matthew 16 and 18, a political word, ekklesia, rather than three possible words which merely meant a gathering, synagoge, theosos, and eronos. But he used the political word, ekklesia. Last takeaway. Church discipline involves serious decision making. Of course, that's a very serious decision. And Jesus used a political term that connotates political decision making, ekklesia. All right. The definition of church lends itself to the idea of the church as a political decision making body using consensus. Now let's look at 6 scriptural examples of consensus. Here are the first 3. Number 1, church discipline. That's serious business, as I said. Replacing an apostle, another serious decision in the New Testament, was done by consensus, as I'll show you. Choosing deacons, another serious decision done by consensus. Here's the next 3. The Jerusalem Council, how to deal with legalism and how to deal with not offending the legalistic Jews and still maintaining Christian freedom. This was done at the Jerusalem Council. And an extremely important decision. It was done by consensus. Excommunication, church discipline, which is a form of church, which is basically the end of church discipline. That was done by consensus. In church courts, where Paul says that you're to judge matters locally and not in the law courts, that was done by making decisions like that was done by consensus. All right, let's look at these examples one by one. First example, Jesus and churches entrust church discipline to elders. And in this course, in this case, actually, that's not actually right. He entrusted church discipline to the church, to the whole church, not the elders. Matthew 18:17 through 18. If he, the brother in the third stage of church discipline, The first stage, if you recall, is go to your brother privately. The second stage is you take a couple of witnesses along. If the brother still refuses to listen, then you go to the third stage, which is when you take it to the whole church. And this is what Jesus says here in Matthew 18. If he, the brother in the third stage of church discipline, refuses to listen to them, the several witnesses in the second stage, go tell it to the church. And I've got church in red here because everybody thinks this is elders. In fact, I wasn't even thinking in the title I put elders. I should have said to the church. Tell it to the church. And if he refuses to listen even to the church, let him be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. Truly I say to you, whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Of course, this is traditional Jewish terminology for discipline in the synagogues. Jesus is using that language. And basically it's talking about excommunication. And Gentile and tax collector, Gentiles didn't have anything to do with. And if somebody refuses to listen to the church, they are excommunicated. All right, now, the interesting thing about here is that the whole church makes the decision, not just the elders, but the whole church. Again, this is wrong. I apologize for this. I need to change my PowerPoints here. He did not entrust church discipline to the elders. He entrusted it to the whole church, for the church to make a consensual decision. We all have this mindset that it's the elders. In fact, even I had the mindset when I made this title right here. No, it's not the elders, it's the church. Second, and I emphasize the point with this little drop-down box here, it does not say tell it to the elders. So I can visually reinforce what I'm orally telling you. Now let's look at the second example of consensual decision making in the church, replacing Judas Iscariot, the nasty traitor of Jesus, who hung himself and who suffered eternal damnation because of what he did. Somebody drew this picture of him. I guess that looks like what he might look like. Now, replacing Judas for the 12th apostle, that was serious business. Acts 1:15 and verse 23 says this: in those days Peter stood up among the brothers, all of them, and that's the company of persons, which was all about 120, and said, they, the church, put forward two, and said blah, 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 blah. And then in verse 23, they, the church, put forward two, Joseph called Barsabbas, who was also called Justus, and Matthias. And Matthias was eventually chosen. So you notice here the apostles led, and the church made the consensual decision. The brothers made the decision. They made the decision. See where I have it emphasized in red here. The brothers, Peter stood up amongst the brothers, and they put forward the two. So the brothers, 120 of them, decided which two they were going to nominate and choose from. Now here we see a pattern of leadership combined with a consensus. The apostles led. Peter identified what the problem was. You see, in those days, Peter stood up and said, hey, we got a problem here. And then the church decided. Now I'm going to show you that pattern as we go through these 6 examples. Leadership, and then consensus decision making. Leadership, and then consensus decision making. Oftentimes we talk about consensus, we leave the leadership out, but we're not going to do that. Third example of consensus, choosing deacons. This is in Acts 6, verses 3 and 5. Therefore, brothers, pick out, I think this was Peter speaking here. Therefore, brothers, pick out from among you 7 men of good repute, full of the Spirit and of wisdom, whom we will appoint to this duty. What they said pleased the whole gathering, and they chose. Who chose the 7 deacons? They chose. The whole gathering, they chose. The brothers chose. Look at the words there in red, and that emphasizes the point nicely. Actually, by the way, it doesn't say deacons. Some people get all picky about that, but I don't care. It's whoever they pick. People who serve the tables, you can call them deacons, you can call them whatever you want. The point is they were chosen by the whole church. And once again, we see this idea of leadership combined with consensus. The 12 apostles identified the problem, and the church decided how to fix the problem of the leaders not having enough time to teach because the Hellenistic Jews were not getting food there when they were holding everything in common. The fourth example of consensus making is the Jerusalem Council, Acts 15, verses 22 through 23. Then pleased it the apostles and elders with the whole church Notice that, the whole church in red, to send chosen men of their own company to Antioch with Paul and Barnabas. This is after the council. They wrote the letter, and then they were going to send the letter out to the other churches, and Antioch was the first one, and Paul and Barnabas, since they were from Antioch, they were going to carry this Jerusalem council letter, which had the decision of the council. Now, the whole church sent these men out. So who chose Judas, named Barsabbas, and Silas, chief men among the brethren? Who chose them to go with Paul and Barnabas back to Antioch? The chosen men. Who chose them? The whole church. The apostles and elders were part of that consensus. I mean, the leaders don't sit back and watch everybody else make a decision, and they don't make input, of course. But my point is, it wasn't only the apostles and elders, it was the apostles and the elders and the whole church decided to send decided to send Judas, Barsabbas, and Silas along with Paul and Barnabas back up to Antioch. All right, starting with verse 23, Luke says this, and they wrote letters by them after this manner. The apostles and elders and brethren send greetings unto the brethren which are of the Gentiles in Antioch and Syria and Cilicia. Now notice who sent that letter out. The apostles and elders and brethren. Now there's a translation problem here, and it could be the apostles and elders who were brethren. And the KJV has the apostles and elders and brethren, which emphasizes the idea that it was the whole church that sent the letter out. It wasn't just the apostles and elders. So there we have the fourth example of decision making by consensus, the Jerusalem Council. Let's look at example number 5. Well, before I do, let me make my point again, is that here we have, once again, the idea of leadership followed by consensus. The apostles and elders identified the problem of how do we deal with the Jews, the Jews we're trying to witness to without offending them, at the same time maintaining the principle of salvation by grace alone. How do we handle this? The apostles and elders identified what the problem was, and then the church decided, the whole church, including the apostles and elders, the whole church decided what they were going to put in that letter, as well as who they were going to send the letter with. Let's look at the fifth example, which is excommunication. 1 Corinthians 5, 4 through 5. This is talking about the immoral brother in the church at Corinth who was sleeping with his stepmother. And it says here, when you are assembled, you plural there, when you guys in Corinth are assembled in the name of the Lord Jesus, and my spirit is present with the power of our Lord Jesus, you, the Corinthians, are to deliver this man to Satan. You, plural, are to deliver this man to Satan for the destruction of the flesh, so that his spirit may be saved in the day of the Lord. Well, the whole church has got to make the decision. It doesn't say the elders kicked this man out. It doesn't say the pastor kicked this man out. There was no the pastor. There were elders, but it wasn't the elders who kicked the man out. It's you guys, all of you. You make the decision. Again, once again, you have leadership combined with consensus. Paul identified the problem. He pointed it out to them. He says, you guys need to do some church discipline. He didn't ask the elders to do it. He asked the church to do it. Leadership plus consensus. Last example, church courts. This is in Matthew 16. Ooh, that's not true. That's a wrong site. This is in, I think it's 1 Corinthians 6 somewhere. Or do you, referring to ordinary believers, do you not know that the saints will judge the world? And if the world is to be judged by you, plural, are you incompetent to try trivial cases? Do you, plural, not know that we are to judge angels? How much more then matters pertaining to this life? Then what Paul says is, you guys in the church at Corinth need to make your own decisions when there's disputes between brothers. You don't need to take it to the secular courts. Now, he didn't say you need to take it to the elders and let the elders decide. He just didn't say that. He didn't have the mindset that we do. So there's our sixth example of consensual decision making. All right, now that I've given you 6 scriptural examples of consensus, and after I've defined ekklesia, which shows that it was consensual decision making, the word itself refers to a political body which makes consensual decisions. Let's go to the third subsection of this first section of my PowerPoint, arguments in favor of the idea of consensus. The third subsection here is scholarly quotations. Now here is a quotation from Colin Brown's Dictionary of New Testament Theology. This is what Colin Brown says. In the councils, this is referring to the Jerusalem Council, Acts 15, which we just mentioned. In the council's decision-making, they, the apostles, are accorded no special preeminence. It is consistent with the non-authoritarian, collegiate character of church leadership, which Acts consistently depicts. Now, this is Acts 1 is choosing Matthias. I've already mentioned that. Acts 6 is choosing the deacons. I've already mentioned that. I don't know what the other ones refer to. But the point is that I want to make here is that Colin Brown uses this phrase here, collegiate character of church leadership. Collegiate, that means consensual. We make the decisions as colleagues, together. We consensually decide. Next, this is from a quote from my good friend Steve Ackerson of the New Testament Reformation Foundation. It's a great quote here. If ever there were a proper time and place for the apostles to make a decision alone apart from the church, it was at the Jerusalem Council in Acts 15. The original apostles were the standard for doctrine and practice. They had been hand-chosen and personally trained by Jesus himself. They were eyewitnesses of the resurrection. In Acts 15, the very nature of the gospel had been called into question. Yet even here, the amazing fact is that the apostles not only included the local Jerusalem elders, but also the whole church. It's a slam dunk, folks. Decision making in the New Testament was done by consensus. Now that concludes the first section of my PowerPoints, arguments in favor of consensus. In the next video, in the next section of the PowerPoint, I'm going to take up authority in the church, different models of authority, democracy, one-man decision-making, autocracy, or oligarchy, decision-making by the elders, that kind of thing. And I'm going to show you different ways that church churchmen have done church government. And of course, most people do church government not because of any way the Bible does it or the pattern of the New Testament. They do it because that's the way their church tradition does it. Nobody ever looks at how decision-making was done in the New Testament. I would bet you almost maybe $1 million that you have never heard a teaching that I've just given you about consensual decision-making. I remember the first time I heard it, I was shocked. I couldn't believe it. But there it is, in plain black and scriptural black and white. And then the last part, probably the third video I'll do, will take up practical issues concerning consensual decision-making. So I hope you will continue with these videos in the playlist, and I hope you enjoyed this one.